Hello and welcome to the second episode of Whimsical Princess. I'm Spirit Bridger, and last episode I told you that I was going to introduce you to some of my works in progress, to which I referred to as a mountain. And it's definitely a small mountain, so bear with me. I'm going to start with one of my most recent works in progress that I'm actively working on right now, not one of my hibernating knits. And that would be this lovely Adventurous cardigan by Locatelli. It's a great big, I refer to it as my sweater coat. And so far, I've just barely managed to get to the split in the sleeves. And I love this cable pattern. It's very, very nice. It does not follow the rules of standard Celtic cabling. So usually, if you are following a standard cable, it will travel over, and if you follow it the whole way around, it will always go over, under, over, under, over, under. Now, it does not follow that here at the end of the little motif section, and of course for the little twists here. So going into the complicated section, just where it starts. And I've had to go back and fix a few mistakes because of that. But it's a really lovely pattern. I think the fit is going to be great. And I'm really loving this yarn. This is actually a West Yorkshire Spinners Aran weight. And I overdyed it because it was a little bit too bright for me. The color is emerald. I think they're in the middle of discontinuing it, but I could be wrong. I picked it up for a steal. I overdyed it with lots of little speckles. I will try and hold it nice and close and hold it still so that you can see. And I think it's going to be lovely. So this is something that I'm picking up basically right away. I like to work on this one every day. In general, I always have at least one complicated project and one simpler project. So the next one is one that kind of darts between the two. And that is another shawl. Surprise, surprise. This is Mosaic Musings by Stephen West. This pattern was actually a gift to me for my birthday. And it's the first time that I've ever done mosaic knitting. Really, really like it. It's a bit confusing because I had done very little working not from pattern with something like this before, and I've learned that I actually struggle a little bit with just written patterns, especially ones that are changing on every line. So if it were, for example, just a simple repeat and it was repeating itself once every couple of rows, and it had a short repeat side to side, I can figure those out and imagine how it's going to look in my head. But transitioning and knowing what to expect, I had a little bit of trouble with. And in the very first line of the mosaic knitting right here, I didn't know what I was expecting. And so I ended up offsetting every stitch. Now I like it, so I'm going to leave it, but it was definitely a mistake. And I'm learning a little bit about my limitations and my strengths and weaknesses. I'm definitely going to work past it, but definitely the mosaic section is not something that I can do when I'm just not thinking about it. Once I had the pattern set, it was fairly easy to follow when I'm going across, but also I wasn't expecting that this pattern has intarsia, because at the edge here, you can see the edge is solid. So it's actually doing an intarsia join right here along the edge. And I'd never done intarsia either, so that was a surprise. But it's really coming along wonderfully. And the black yarn is just simply Drops Fabel, which I quite like. It's a good sturdy yarn, simple, not too rough, not terribly soft, but it does the job. And then the yarn that I'm using as the contrast color is a yarn that I dyed myself, and I dyed it specifically for this project. I loved the colorway so much that I dyed it several more times, and I'll show you what it looks like all caked up. This is what it looks like in a cake. And it's mostly a turquoise blue with some sapphires in it, a little bit of gold, and a little bit of rust. I named the colorway. I liked it so much that I named the colorway, and I don't do that terribly often. I named it Nonchalant after the very first moment in the first scene of Pirates of the Caribbean, when Captain Jack Sparrow leaps off, just steps casually from the crow's nest onto the dock. Next in my lineup is something that I have not touched in a very long time, even though I should. I put it on hold. I put it on hold a very long time ago before I moved back to Edinburgh. And this is a test knit for myself, basically. This is one of my designs that is still in the making. This is the Squall Shawl, but in fingering weight rather than in the Aran weight that I was working on earlier, or that I showed you in the last episode. The last one I showed you was in Malabrigo Rios and Hedgehog Fibers DK, and this is Drops Nord, and this one's going to be an all one color version. It's got a lovely wave stitch here, and going into the herringbone here, and it is a long one. It takes a long time because it doesn't look very big, but it's very wide. It's a shallow crescent. And I love the yarn. I love the project. I love where it's going, but it does take a long time. The rows are very, very long. It's difficult to set down when I've got kids. And right now, most of the projects, I like to be able to just set down right quick. The next one is a little bit of a special one. I cast this one on, not on my birthday, but I consider it one of my birthday shawls. And it was a very special one because I got the pattern and I picked out the yarn. I got the yarn for birthday yarn, so I had to wait until my birthday to actually open the yarn up. And then it was several days before I managed to get it wound by hand with a small child, because my baby boy was only, he was just about a year old at the time. No, even less. This was when I missed a year. This was when he was less than a year old. He was only a couple of months old when I first started this. This is Lindisfarne, and the pattern is by Lucy Hague. And it's this really lovely pattern. It's this Celtic cabling, and it's on a background of garter stitch, and it's got these thicker cables in the green and then thinner cables in the dark blue. The colors are Solis and Cote d'Azur, and I just love them together. I love working on this project, but as you can see, it is very long. This is actually in the round. So this is a 60-inch cable, which is just the perfect size for this. Thank goodness. And it's going to be steeked in this section once it's all finished. But of course, these cables are a little bit on the tricky side, and they require quite a bit of concentration, and the rows are very, very long, which is why this one got set aside as well. Now, when I first moved to Edinburgh, I didn't have access to a lot of my things, and they weren't shipped over right away. So I had to mothball most of these things, and I had very little that I could take with me at the time. So thankfully, I put away most of these projects quite well with the yarn that they're stored with, and I hope to be picking this one up again soon. But I have a few more things that I need to tackle before I pick this lovely thing up again. Here I am just telling you all my excuses for why I haven't gotten to it. These are all beloved projects. I will finish them. I promise. And while I'm at it, this is one of my favorite storage methods. Just a squidgy rubber bucket from Asda. Honestly, I prefer the smaller ones, but I can't find them anymore. And they're really great because I can squish them around if I'm working with multiple colors. And for example, I was doing a helical cowl and I was managing 3 balls of yarn at the same time. And instead of trying to untwist it all, I just spun the bucket. So they're very handy. I recommend them. But I'm also a fan of project bags. This one's one of my favorites. It is also the favorite of my children, so occasionally we have to steal it back and forth from each other. And once they forget about it again, it makes its way back into my stash. Right now it's holding a little colorwork project. This is going to be a set of fingerless gloves, and these will be an exact duplicate of my Sidehilling Handwarmers, which I've already released the pattern for, but I gifted the originals, and so I want to remake my originals so that I can show them off and wear them. The yarn for this, almost forgot. The yarn for this one is Knit Picks Palette. And I thought the palette was a little bit too rough for me at first, but I found that with wear, I'm quite happy with it, and it's really very nice for color work. I love the colors, and I especially love the heathers. The teal here, the dark teal is Shoal, and the green is Shire Heather. I really like both of these a lot. I know that there's a more local company that does a lot of yarns like this called Jameson and Smith, and I really like their heathers as well, but they're a little bit rougher, and frankly I have quite a bit of palette in my stash, so I'm not looking to fill it up with a lot more right now. I'm going to take a quick sip of my coffee. Next up, we have Sizzle Pop. This is a really fun pattern. This is Brioche. This is the side that I think of as the main side, and this is the reverse. This yarn is the Malabrigo Makita, and the color is Vulcan, just the same as my Featherlane scarf. And this side is Hedgehog Fibers Skinny Singles in the colorway Deep End. And I adore these colors together. When I first laid the skeins together, I was so in love, and I still love it to bits. They work really, really well together. They're both singles. I've found that the Hedgehog Fibers is actually a little bit thinner, a little bit more felted than the Malabrigo. And the Malabrigo is just a little bit more fluffy. But they are just lovely. Love the colors together. Love working with them both. This project is a joy. And the rows are getting longer and longer. And it does take a little bit of keeping track of. On the simple rows, it's not so difficult. And I can just whiz right across and I can stop when I need to. But on the trickier rows, if I have to set it down for terribly long, it can be a little bit more difficult to pick back up. So I tend to be very particular about always finishing a row whenever I'm doing this one. And I try to end on a row that I can recognize, because even though I try to keep track, sometimes you just forget to hit that button to keep the counter. And I'm a visual knitter. I like to be able to look at a pattern and figure out where I am from looking at it. Some rows it's easier than others on this. This pattern is by Knit Graffiti, and she does a lot of really lovely brioche patterns. This is probably the first major brioche project that I've done. I've done a couple of little hats, but they were very, very simple. I really look forward to wearing this one. It is so scrumptious. Next up, we have another brioche project. This one is by Stephen West, one of the smaller buckets. This one is Meandering. Oopsies. There we go. It's getting big enough that it's actually a little bit more tricky to show off. But what I really love is the spine. It's a triangle shawl, and the spine is this really lovely zigzag. The yarn is Knit Picks Alpaca in Elise and, ooh, I'm having trouble remembering the red one. It's exactly the same as the Autumn Heather, but it's the pure alpaca, the Alpaca Cloud. And they had a special name for it. Lydia. It's Lydia. And this one is squishy and soft. Took me so long to decide on the colors, but I love these colors together. They're very me. And I had a lot of trouble finding a way that I was happy with alpaca yarn, because I did not like using alpaca yarn. I tried using it in color work first, and that was probably my mistake. Color work doesn't seem very suited to alpaca yarn. It doesn't have a lot of stretch to it, and it's a little bit slippery, so it's difficult to keep your tension. And wool is a little bit more forgiving. It will stretch to accommodate you just a little bit. It'll be a little bit springy, and I wasn't happy with it when I tried to use it in color work. It felt lovely as a fabric, but it looked horrible. This, I think it looks beautiful, and I love the feel of the fabric. It stretches more than you would. Just because it's slippery, the stitches tend to slip a little bit further, and so you get a more open brioche than you would if you had a toothy wool. But I think that works for this pattern. I tend to work with needle sizes a little bit smaller than standard, and I think that's perfectly fine. It really works out for me. You got to go with what you know. So that is Meandering. So far, the only pure alpaca project that I've ever been happy with. Next up, we have a little bit of an odd one. Another funny little project bag. I got these project bags real cheap. There are still lots of suppliers of these. They sell them as a purse organizer, and they have lots of pockets on the outside. Mostly pretty empty on the inside, and the only places there are zippers are sort of on the edges. I almost never use the zipper part. It's fine by me. It's also got little snaps on the edge, so you can snap the bag together and make it seem more closed at the top. I almost always have them open, and they even have little handles if you like. But one of the really nice things is that you can put, you know, those donut put-ups where it's a little squidgy ball, but it's more donut shaped. If you put one in on its end, it'll just pull out beautifully out of this. Every other way I've tried to manage those, I've never been happy with. It tries to jump all over the place, or it gets snagged. You put a donut one on end in here, and it works out wonderfully. I will show you what I mean real quick. So this is Knit Picks palette in a donut put up. You can just put it in like that, and it just comes out. No trouble at all. So especially with color work projects, when I'm trying to manage 2 of these at the same time, I've found these bags are invaluable. Now, that project that I took out of it, this is Cara Doll, another Lucy Hague. Now, the thing about this one is it was not designed for mohair. And yes, there are cables there. So this is a mixture of Rowan Kid Silk Haze, which is the red one in the color Liqueur, which is a beautiful red. That was gifted to me. And then Knit Picks Aloft in Kenai, which is a teal, and I love teals. I think they look great together. I love this shawl. It is fluffy and fantastic. Yes, the cables are not terribly obvious, but at the same time, you can definitely see them there. And if you hold it up to the light, you won't be able to see it very well from there. There's no backlighting for a good reason. But if you hold it up to the light, you can definitely see the cables in the light. So I like to think of them as ghost cables. This being a mohair project, though, not very friendly to tank back. You definitely need to have a cable needle for doing the cables, and I've gone mostly to working my cables without a cable needle. And it's something that I still have to refer to the chart on a regular basis. But it is gorgeous. And another one, I'm so close to finished. I should finish this, because it will be snuggly and warm and light as a feather. Part of the reason why it got mothballed was I had to find my second ball of Kenai, because as you can see, I got to the very, very end. Yes, that was Yarn Chicken. Oh, I'm going to hold it up to the camera so you can see the fluff a little bit better. There we are. It's had a little bit of time to shine. Also, it packs up so small. This will definitely be a good one to have just tucked away for an emergency. We're drawing close to the end. Surprise, surprise. But no surprise, another Lucy Hague project. This one is Bane, and I cast it on while I was getting very, very pregnant with my daughter, and I knew there was no chance in the world I was going to be able to finish it. But this is an exceptionally complicated project, and I knew it was going to be. And I wanted to cast it on just for the challenge of figuring out if I could. And I sort of considered it a cast on. So many people have had to cast this on several times to get it right, and I was no exception. I had to redo this twice. Not the whole thing, thank goodness. But what's really special about this one is it has cables on both sides. It's reversible cables. And she figured out a clever way with little slip stitches, and basically you do the cables on one side and you slip the stitches when you're doing the reverse side, and you're doing them mirrored at the same time, and then when you get to the next row they just kind of slip together and then they're mirrored on both sides. But the thing that I don't like about this pattern is that the big cable in the center and the little cables on the edge have a different number of rows per repeat. So that's going to make it very, very difficult to keep track of. I made it to the stage where they were starting to, where I would have had to start keeping track of the rows separately. And that was where I stopped working on it. And well, I was due in just a couple of weeks after that, so I thought it's best to set that one aside and pick it up again when I have more time and energy to devote to a truly complicated project. But I really loved the challenge of it. I learned the tubular cast on, which I love and have used many times since. And need to turn off an alarm. Oop. And I loved learning how to work those cables. And also it has a little faux I-cord edge, which is also accomplished with slip stitches. And this is a tremendous challenge, really satisfying. The yarn is Drops Baby Merino, and it's just their light gray heather. I like it because I think it will look like stone at the very end. But this is one that I will not be picking up again for a little while yet. It's still a long time before I feel like I can really give this the attention it needs. So sadly, this one will be waiting for quite a while longer. And the last little project that I have to show right now is my on-the-go project. This is my little sock bag that I take with me. I'm working on Mercury Socks right now. And this is Stylecraft Life 4-ply, which is basically, it's a cheap 4-ply. I misread and thought that it was the normal 75-25 wool nylon mix. It was reversed. It's 75% nylon and 25% wool. So it's got a little bit of a funny feel to it, but honestly it's not unpleasant, and it is very, very tough, and it was cheap, and I just wanted to have a sock project in my bag, so I'm working on the Mercury Socks. It's a lovely little lace pattern, and I don't remember the designer. I'm sure I can look it up in the links. But that's one of the things that I like to have on the go. I always like to have a travel project. I like to have something simple and something complex all the time. I always have to have one of each. Sometimes several, as you can see. But the very, very last work in progress is the shawl that is my design shawl. This one's my very own design. It's not very much to look at yet, but I've already done a couple of tests for it. I did one little mini shawlette, and I did one more full size in pure alpaca, and that one's destined for my mother. I made it in autumn colors, which don't suit me at all. But this one is with Madeline Tosh, and Madeline Tosh has sponsored this one. They've sent me the pashmina, and the pashmina is a wool cashmere mix, and it's really, really lovely. We've got Thunderstorm, Iris, and Spectrum. I love Spectrum especially. But the yarn is so soft and so squishy. And this will be my showcase shawl for once I actually release the pattern. Not much to see yet, though, but it is very, very lovely to work with. In exciting news this week, I finally finished my Shadow Dancer shawl. Ta-da! It was only about a week in binding off. And I still haven't blocked it yet. So you'll have to wait, but it's gigantic. And I had to do the cast off a couple of times. I started it several times. I started and undid about this much 3 times. The first time I just wasn't having it with the picots and I gave up. So I took it all back and I started doing a standard boring bind off along the edge. And I realized, without going too far, that it wasn't going to give me the edge that I wanted. It was not going to be stretchy enough. It's not designed to be stretchy enough to accommodate the sort of edging that it's got. It needs those picots to give it a little extra. So I went back and I thought about it, and I figured out, Well, I could do the picots on a smaller needle rather than trying to cast on the extra stitches on the tip of the needle like it says in the pattern. It's a Bunitz pattern, and she recommended casting on the picot stitches on the very tips of the needles, and it was giving me a bit of trouble. Eventually I decided I was just going to get out my sock needles and start doing the picots with my sock needles instead. So I was working with two sizes of needles all the way across, and it took me a week. And my son was clearly very tired of me working on this shawl by the end of it. But he was also very, very good, and he was very patient. And if I said that I had to finish a picot, he would wait until I finished a picot. Another really frustrating thing is that I went over on the yarn estimates. It estimated that I would need about 1,000 yards or meters of yarn. And so I ordered enough yarn for it, and I got through all of it. Luckily, I had an extra skein set aside, and so I started winding that up. I found that there were breaks in it, and I was cursing a little bit and thinking, oh well, at least it's just the bind off, so I was only going to use a little bit at the same time. So if any of the skeins had a break, at least it was this one. But then I kept finding another break, and another one, and another one. And by the end of it, I had 9 balls of yarn out of that 150-gram skein. It took me 2 hours to sort out the mess. And I should have taken a picture of my Swift because it looked like a right mess. I ended up using clothespins and winding up each section of yarn and then clipping it to my Swift just so that I could manage the untangling of everything. It took me so long. And my son really likes to help me wind yarn. Corwin loves helping me wind yarn, and he was so frustrated because I had to keep stopping and saying, no, I have to sort out the skein. I have to untangle it now. So after that was all done, we went and we wound a good skein. And I was not able to use that skein in the bind off. I ended up needing to get another one. Luckily, Wool Warehouse is a great company, and they sent me a replacement skein after I showed them pictures of the devastation of that one. But look at this magnificent shawl. It is gigantic, and it will be even bigger after blocking. Now, I said last week that I also dye yarn, and I didn't show you anything. So I'm going to show you some of the yarn that I dyed. This is one of the skeins that I dyed for my birthday. On my birthday, I dyed a bunch of rainbow skeins, and I actually dyed them all at the same time. And I really liked seeing how they turned out differently on the different bases. This is a Regia base, and it turned out almost pastel, almost neon, with this dark gray instead of black. And this is one of the ones that I like the most. I really liked a lot of them, but a lot of them wouldn't show up on camera nearly as well as this one. But it is a beautiful skein. I love it to bits. I have no idea what I'm going to make with it. I decided I didn't need to know what I was going to make with it on my birthday. I could just dye whatever the heck I wanted. The next one is an example of my Nonchalant. This is one of the ones that I dyed up immediately after I dyed up the ones for my Mosaic Musings shawl. And this one is special because out of my great big bucket of hand-dyed yarn, Corwin decided that he wanted to take this one to bed to snuggle. He always takes something to bed for his bedtime, and sometimes it's a truck, sometimes it's an airplane, sometimes it's a stuffed animal, but he decided he wanted to take yarn, and this is the one out of the great big bucket. He picked this one to take and have a nap time with. And not only that, but it has just lived by the bedside that whole time, and occasionally he'll just decide he doesn't want to cuddle his bunny. He wants to cuddle yarn. He wants to cuddle this yarn. It's one of 2 skeins that are by the bed, and I think the other one fell behind the bed. So I was only brought out this one. But that's why this one is a special skein. And then this one is another one of the colorways that I really, really like. This is just a really lovely orangey gold. I named it Sun-Kissed Amber. You can tell I like it because I named it. And it's also the first yarn that I ever used in a project. You might notice matches. And that is definitely